So we are listening to you. We are not brushing anybody off. Please just give us a little bit of time to go through this and keep coming to these meetings and feeding this information back to us. If you don't understand it, we'll try to explain it as best we can. Any comments here?
Yeah, well, just as far as for, and this is kind of goes to Jeff and what several others said, if you look back, does the public have copies of the minutes?
They are available online. I
Okay.
don't know if people,
Because like, for example, at our last workshop, our item number 3 addressed just that. The establishing and creating an ER&R fund and using, like we're going to be surplusing a lot of old vehicles. The funds coming in for that would go directly into the ER&R fund for replacement of new vehicles and equipment. Okay, so we did it, and we determined that we're going to need a resolution to do that. Our workshop item number 4, which is going to come up on today, is the surplusing of vehicles to sell off and to bring us down to a manageable fleet, and discussing timeframes and such for replacing them. So if you, we have been discussing them, and if you listen to it, and we also went into great discussion about the 411 route. That's going to be a continuing discussion at the next workshop / special meeting. So I would encourage you to be there. We'll be looking for some solutions to that.
Do we have a date for that?
April 13th.
Thank you.
anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Jim, do you have any comments regarding public comment?
Just reinforcing your observation that it will take time because the building up of reserves is actually something that took time in the past, and they were built up over many years, and then they were drawn down too quickly, and it will. But in most cases, actually, most of the drawdown was anticipated, at least in percentage terms. But it will take time to rebuild those reserves to the levels that we are comfortable with. But the encouraging thing is that it looks like we are adding to our sort of net cash position a small amount each month that is positive. And that addition to the positive net flow, I think, will increase after the payback of the short-term loans. There's short-term loans and there's one long-term loan. And the long-term loan is written in such a way that it can't be advance paid. And the same is actually true of the short-term loans. Just add that. But we are anticipating completion of paying off the short-term loans in the middle of the year, and that will be, I think, a significant boost to both our cash flow position and our reserve position.
Any further comments? We'll move on then to the executive director's comments, and I know that Mr. Grasta responded to Ms. Brookie? Yeah. Brunke, yes. And what I read that he submitted for public record, he's going to briefly go through that. We're not going to spend a lot of time on individual questions. We have limited time for this, and if there's a question that doesn't get fully answered to your satisfaction or anybody else, make a note of it. You can email in, and we will further elaborate so that you do get firsthand knowledge and get good information. And so it is the executive director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Brunke, I appreciate your ongoing interest in Highland Transit, and I think the questions have been fair, and the questions have been thought-provoking in terms of allowing staff to dig deeper into certain areas and certain issues, and in some cases it's become learning process for us too, since most of us are new to our respective positions. But, and I appreciate the fact that you acknowledge that, for the most part, hopefully, that we're getting good answers to you and answers that that you understand. I think some of these questions may have already been answered, such as the last note payments being paid in 2015 and the final bond payment in January 2019. And again, these are responses to Ms. Sprunke and her questions. We are on track to pay our insurance premiums in October 2015 and January 2016. We're solid on that. The issue about the cash flow statement and the $525,000, you know, I reviewed that with you in my statement to you, but at the same time, we will be relooking at the breakout of cash reserves and itemizing those reserves and ensuring that there's a clear understanding, especially for the public, to know how those funds are being, where they're going to and how they're being spent. And then the maintenance question. At first I didn't understand exactly what you were looking for, but with your explanation I understand it now. I can assure you that we are still managing and maintaining a top-notch, high-quality maintenance shop with no areas being cut or overlooked as far as our budget situation. There is nothing being cut. We are looking at ways to save as far as doing things in a more efficient manner or providing or obtaining products at lower prices where we can and doing a little more competitive shopping for parts and other supplies. But I can assure you that no maintenance processes, no preventive maintenance schedules are being bypassed or overlooked. I'm very proud of our shop, especially with the small number of staff that we have for the shop. They're doing a superb job, and in fact, we are at the point where we can do much of our outsourced labor and maintenance in-house now, where we would have to take buses to various shops or vendors for repair. And we're hoping later this year to begin rebuilding, at least partially rebuilding, older engines that need to be rebuilt and recycled. So, you know, we're doing what we can to stretch our dollars, but not at the expense of safety. And I think that's most of what you asked, I think.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Crafty. Financial report. Jim, you're going to elaborate on your previous financial statement, financial comments?
I think actually that the financial report goes to Paul, I believe. I don't have a separate report.
Okay.
First I'll talk about our cash summary report. We show an increase in cash for the month ending February, about $28,000. And I think that's really a positive sign, considering that February being such a short month, we didn't receive our 3 operating grant monies in February, which total around $200,000. So that's a really good sign for our agency. I think we're finding different types of savings. We have fuel and other efficiencies that we're experiencing. So, you know, so far so good. We're on track with our budget in terms of cash flow. So that's a really good thing. And also, the other statement that I provided, our budget actual report shows that, we showed a profit for the month of about $10,000. So that's another signal or sign that, we're operating within our budget and things are going well. And that's really all I have to say.
Okay, I'm going to give you a surprise question. Are you prepared to recommend a time frame when we actually establish a reserve? Can you give us a report by our next workshop that said this is a schedule of how we could put X number of dollars away each month to build that reserve that we were talking about, both for replacement of vehicles and major equipment by identifying the equipment, because we have things like HVAC, we have lifts, we have a lot of electronic items out there that you use in the maintenance facility. We need to know what the amortized life of those vehicles and the other major equipment is so that we can have a justified reason for having a certain amount set aside for those.
We certainly can do that. The time frame.
Is that a yes?
I think that's yes, but there is some qualifications.
Sure.
First thing would be is, like was already stated, is we're in a period of recovery, so we're trying to fulfill past debts, you might say.
I
So
recognize
notice
that.
and insurance payments. So we're in that period of recovery, and that's the highest priority. But we also have scheduled in other items to be purchased, buses, radios, and they were scheduled in to be purchased like mid-year. And so those monies will be put in reserve because we're still going to follow through on those promises to purchase those items. But on the other hand, that money really hasn't been received yet because we were planning to receive those monies, say mid-year, to pay them mid-year through sales tax money or whatever other avenues we had. So we're in a period of transition where we're receiving money and planning to pay that out currently in order to meet our obligations as we slowly build reserves. And those reserves are gained through efficiencies, which is slowly happening. So, my recommendation would be build the reserve, pay those current obligations, and plan, like you say, into the future to replace buses and vans. And one of the resolutions we have on the table for this meeting is to do exactly that, plan for future purchases of vans. So, as I already heard, this is a long process, but the planning is certainly what we want to do, and we want to move forward in that direction, lay out a schedule of all of our rolling stock and make sure it's in a good replacement schedule, and then budget for that.
Thank you. As we go through this agenda, the board has adopted a stabilization plan with the participation and cooperation of the staff of Mr. Dresta, and that's going to require a written plan. Given all of the restraints that we have, we still have to have a written recovery plan that says these reserves are being set aside for these items over this period of time. I don't know if it's going to be 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years, but we're not going to get to those reserves and get the stabilized format for this transit district unless we have those goals laid out on a schedule that our best knowledge says we can do this, 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 and this, and then we stick to that plan. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, and I think some of our meetings that we've already had laid out, for 2015, our schedule of revenues and expenses, and so that to me is a financial plan. You see your money's coming in, you see how you're spending that. Any monies that perhaps aren't spent on capital items in the current year, if there's a delay for some reason, like we have a slight delay on the purchase of buses because the state contract hasn't been finalized with the state yet.
Right.
So any delays like that, those monies that were scheduled for those expenses or purchases would be set aside into a reserve fund so that, they would be spent for the appropriate purpose.
Okay, well, that schedule of how we're going to set funds aside, how we're going to purchase the vehicles, the radios, all that kind of stuff, is also tied to our decision about how we're going to manipulate routes and how we're going to either consolidate the routes, how much we're going to hopefully generate on advertising in the buses, and if we go to a fare system, what our fares are going to mean, what they're going to be, and what does that mean. It's not just looking at the financial statement, at least for me. It's looking at how are we going to create these things and what is the timeline that's going to take to get to full implementation of the reserve set-asides. We may be looking at this thing over 4 years, but if we don't start looking at it now, 4 years from now, we'll still be mumbling to ourselves what happened. Okay? I think, any further comments? Okay.
Makes sense.
One thing that I would like to bring up in, let's see, we have the operations report before I make any further comment there. So, who is making Sean's not here today?
Sean is at a training conference today. Really, there's not much to report on the operations end, other than we're gearing up for the implementation of Route 58, which begins April 6th. And we've gotten our flyers together, our notices together. New schedules have been put together and are now available. We've got all the bus stops in. And tomorrow we're starting training for drivers that are going to be driving that route. So Route 58 is coming along very nicely. And interestingly, as I've talked to people in the community, I've received a lot of positive feedback relative to the prospect of that route coming on board. Langley is particularly happy with the mayor. Langley has expressed to me great satisfaction with the reroute and the new route going into place. So I think there has been a lot of positive feedback, but a lot of good planning went into it. I think it's going to be a great success.
Have you considered getting the newspaper to feature it maybe, or at some point, early April, or maybe right after it starts?
We have been talking with the newspaper as to press release and other information like that. I don't know if the press release has gone out yet or not, but certainly it will.
Sure. Good.
Other than that, the Route 411 discussion would have been part of an operations report, and that has been tabled. At this time, I don't really have anything else on the operations end. We will need to have further discussion with the board through probably the workshop format in terms of the communication system, giving the board an update. There has been a lot occurring with, particularly with ICOM, back and forth in terms of our working relationship there, and it's become quite a productive relationship over the last couple of weeks. We're making progress in terms of getting things done. So I would like to suggest providing enough for staff, providing an update and communication system. Maybe at the last workshop if there's time on the agenda. And then just one other item I want to mention. Give the board a heads up that I continue looking into digging deeper into the shop floor issue, going back to issues related to the contractor, the engineer, the architect, and so on, to find out where our problems started and how we're going to get them resolved. So I'm continuing to work on that shop floor issue. It's very, it's going to be a very complicated process to, point the finger in the right direction. But we're continuing to work on that, and as well as the auditor's findings relative to the construction grant for this facility. That there's still a couple outstanding items that are under question that we need to come to resolution on within the next couple of months, and I would like the opportunity to provide the board an update on that in workshop format as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Chair's report, I'm going to tell you that Mr. Bress and I had several conversations regarding this building and the contracting and et cetera for this building. And the public should know that none of the city management people have had anything to do with this building and the contracting process for this building. This is new to all of them as much as it is to me. We sat down and went through some of the documents. We probably spent over the last maybe 6 hours digging through this stuff. My field of expertise is in commercial construction. I have a lot of questions about the process and who has managed the process and how they arrived at certain decisions and why we don't have certain documents that we're able to put our hands on right now. But you should know that the staff is working on this and the board is also staying dialed in with them on this with the goal of resolving the issue about the slab. That's the primary issue, is the slab, the coating on the slab, and retention still owed to subcontractors on this project, which is a sizable amount of money. It's certainly not the retention that is owed is not something that is in the budget or supposed to be in the budget or in the grant. It is my understanding, for the knowledge that I have right now, that it is set in escrow, but it hasn't been released, and I don't have an answer for why it hasn't been released. And I know there's regulations regarding what the contractor can hold for his subcontractors, and we're getting to the bottom of that. So it's not panic time, it's management time on this thing, okay? and that's where we're going with it. That concludes the chair's report. Any board discussion?
Well, just a couple of things real quick. On the radios, I've been in contact with Tom Shaughnessy, who's over at ICOM, and actually I just got an email as I was coming in here this morning in response to some stuff too, and they're explaining the situation further in depth to me and our resolutions, and much of this is being radio situation and the delay of it. I can tell you a lot of it is being driven by the FCC and frequency requirements. Okay. But ICOM is working closely. It's a very long email I got, but just the digest of what I've got at the beginning of it is it looks like it's going to cost less than what was anticipated. Actually, quite a bit less. Anyway, they're a good group up there. I sit on the board there, so I'm keeping in close contact with Tom. And once I digest what we've got here, we'll have further discussion on our next work session. The other thing, I do not know, and this is for management and administration, if you guys have been getting a lot of calls from Camano. I certainly have. I got an earful from them last night and a lot of emails, but there's a local news magazine on Camano called Crab Cracker. And somebody wrote a letter to the Crab Cracker saying that all of Camano Island service was being discontinued, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very long, page-long deal, and what the people on Camano failed to read was on page 1 of the magazine that this is the April Fool's Day issue, and everything in there is spoofs and satire. So, if you get any calls from Camano freaking out about the island people have said that all service to Camano and all service for the 411 is being canceled as of next week. It is not true. Okay. It was very what was entertaining reading. In my opinion, it was a very poorly timed and bad joke. That's what I got.
That's just what we need, more gravel in the gears.
Yeah, it was ugly.
Jim, how about you?
I don't have anything further. Jill Johnson and I continue to review the vouchers in advance of the workshops, and which gives us a little prior warning of how things are going. And I try to also have an extra meeting with Paul each month to make sure that the cash flow summary report is backed up by what's in the bank. I'm encouraged that both our incoming revenues and our outflow are very close to what we budgeted. And if it was right on the button, we would be, I think, considered geniuses. But it is close enough, I think, to give us some reassurance that our current 2015 budget is going to work out well, and we'll have these funds accumulating for reserves.
Thank you. We're going to move forward to business item number 1, and this is the approval of a letter from the Board of Directors Island Transit Recovery Story, and Mr. Grasto will present that. This is a letter that will be signed by the interim executive director and all of the board members. Jackie Henderson is not here. She's out of town. She's already signed this. And Jill Johnson is not here. And a copy of this letter will be delivered to her so that she has it Monday morning. And this letter, the transit story, is what our commitment is to you, the public, and what we're going to do in the short term, particularly 2015, as it's stated, but what our goal is, how we're going to get there. This is a contract between the staff, Mr. Grasta, ourselves, and the community. And Mr. Grasta, if you go ahead, this is in your agenda packet, if you got it online or however you did this. So in an effort to be fairly brief to get through this, I think the key points you can present to the public, and you can get this document. It'll be public record. It will also be online.
Sure, I'll try to be brief, Mr. Chairman. I do want to point out in the letter, the board has adopted a stabilization plan that includes 6 points, 6 key strategies. Number 1, development of financial stabilization plan, which we've been working on. Consideration of new funding sources, which we continue to look at and research. Review of overlapping service with other transit districts, which I currently am in the process of doing. Ongoing review of all routes and schedules, which is something that we're doing now on an ongoing weekly and monthly basis. Investigation of collaborative transportation solutions for the Naval Air Station, school districts, and other qualifying organizations such as various social and human service organizations. And number 6, discussion with neighboring public transit districts for ways to improve operating efficiencies, which I also am currently working on and working with neighboring transit systems. These strategies have been developed to set the foundation for a more promising future. Some of the more specific efforts we're engaged in are to continuously monitoring the balanced 2015 budget, continuation of the service enhancement plan to reinstate and modify most transit services that were formerly eliminated in 2014. That will begin, as I mentioned earlier, April 6th with Route 58. Continuation of efforts to identify new sources of additional revenue, which previously has been discussed relative to transit advertising and generating fare box revenue. Development of an asset management plan, which we've already done, and accompanying asset replacement plan, which we're in the process of doing. And continuing regional service coordination efforts with Skagit, Whatcom, and Snohomish counties, again, an activity I'm currently involved in with various officials in those counties. That is a summary of what's included in this one-page letter to be signed by myself and all of Highland Transit's board members.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Are there any public comments regarding that before we move on with the board? Oh, Mr. Brown.
What was the part about the fare box revenue?
That is an ongoing discussion with the board, with staff, continuing to review what we'll be doing as far as at some point in the future, looking very, very closely at fares, how much those fares should be, various fare categories. It's going to be a very extensive process, but that is one revenue source that's definitely in the mix of various things we're looking at.
Thank you. Any further comments from the public? Gail.
So this is a plan that's basically for the board and staff and the public. But it was already pre-signed by one of the board members without knowing if it's been approved or if any changes need to be done to it?
I can answer that question for you. This letter was presented, it started with a motion and a vote, a unanimous vote of the board to go forward with the motion to identify a stabilization plan. And then the next step for that was we had a draft copy, and that was reviewed in the last workshop. And during that workshop, we came to a conclusion on the language without taking any action on this. The draft included signatures for all of the members. Jackie Henderson is out of the country right now. She read this letter, even though it hasn't been formally approved by the board. She agrees to this by her signature, and we're going to sign this today for the three of us. And Jill Johnson will sign it on Monday. But we will approve this, or if the board does approve it, we will be subject to all of the signatures. We feel that everybody has bought into this, everybody has to buy into this, not just verbally, but in writing. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Any further public comment? Having no further public comment, how about comments by the sitting board right now?
I think we went over it carefully twice, so I move that we go ahead and accept this as.
Can you hold your motion for just a moment until we get through the public comment, or not public, but board comment? If Mr. Hanover has
Sure.
comments.
No, I have no further.